Why is fentanyl so attractive to people?
They don't care if they kill every American in the United States.
It was hell for my family and hell for my son.
This drug is so evil that it really sees no boundaries. Why do you think we're not hearing more about this?
We are witnessing the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. This will not get better until we go after the cartels and their labs.
Dr. Jensen, Jaeson Jones, thank you so much for coming in to talk about fentanyl, the #1 killer of Americans 18 to 45-year-olds. It's mind-boggling what is happening in America right now. What I'd like to understand is, why is this happening? Where is it coming from? And really, what can we pragmatically do about it? And I couldn't think of a better duo for this conversation. Dr. Jensen, you went through a personal experience, which we're going to hear about in a moment. And Jaeson, you have been fighting on our borders to try to stop the influx of crime as well as fentanyl into America. And I just would love to just flesh out this very important conversation and in some ways make this into a public service announcement so that families like mine can better understand how to deal with fentanyl and what to do to serve our communities and our children. So as we get started, Dr. Jensen, if you don't mind, you had a hell on earth experience with fentanyl. I think that would be the word. If you're okay opening up and telling us what has happened with your family.
Sure. So my wife and I are sort of physicians, live in a relatively modest-sized town, middle class. You would think, what could go wrong? But when our son was young, ended up getting exposed to substances early, and we didn't quite realize what was going on, and it progressed over time, and his life started falling apart, and he struggled. And we knew he was having trouble with alcohol, but then I got a call one day from my wife saying his fiance's found him down in the garage. She's trying to resuscitate him. And I thought, oh, he's probably drunk again. It'll be okay. But I better go over there just in case. And I had just gotten to my car and was about to drive over when I got a second call. And all I remember was, he's dead. And so I rushed over there. And by the time I got there, it was just the police and my wife and his fiance and her little girl, because the medics, there's nothing to do. And so that was sort of the end of a 15-year journey for him that started when he was an early teenager. And I was fortunate enough, if you want to call it fortunate, that when he went through one of his addiction hospitalizations, made him do a diary of how this had happened. And it started when he was 10 and he was visiting some kid, and they got into the alcohol of the parents who weren't there. And then when he's 15, he started smoking marijuana and having drinks once a week. And then we ended up having, we used to house hockey players, and then we ended up one who I just couldn't stand. And it turns out he was not a good kid. He was into drugs. He was a bad influence on my son. I'd wanted to kick him out, but he didn't. And then my son got injured playing hockey and got prescribed in a prolonged periods of opioids for that. And between him feeling good about it and then this young man who was living in our house, from there it was a steady addictive spiral for him. And he went from being somebody who had a purpose in life and wanted to do something to essentially failing at almost everything because he was compromised by drugs and alcohol. And of course, then when you're failing, you need things to make you feel better. So why not more drugs and alcohol? It worked out so well the first time, right? And it just kind of went down and down from there. And we thought he was over it. We thought he was better. We'd reconnected. And then this happened. And and it's happened to plenty of young people in the medium-sized town that I live in. And it's to say that this steals your life, even if it's almost worse if you have to deal with it for 15 years and you watch your dreams fall apart, than if you just go.
Mm.
But I can tell you that it was hell for my family
Mm.
and hell for my son.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something I would not want to wish on anybody.
Both you and your wife are well-known physicians at Mayo Clinic. And I remember when you shared the story with me, you shared that your son had a career. He was a nurse.
Yeah.
And so what was so shocking to me when you described that your son died from fentanyl was that he would have known that fentanyl is really dangerous for him. And here we are, basically a family in the medical field, top-notch family that really deals with this reality that fentanyl is a drug that sees no borders, right? It doesn't discriminate. And we're talking about a family that, to me, it was just so shocking that you guys went through that. When you said that you were shocked and surprised that he died from fentanyl, did you not know that he was on drugs?
So he had he had an alcohol problem, and then he had a problem with oxycodone. And the problem is oxycodone is really expensive. And when you lose your job because of your addiction, and now you can only get jobs that pay pretty low, you can't afford to buy oxycodone. So you end up buying whatever you can get from the dark web, which is a lot cheaper. But he probably didn't even know it was fentanyl. He just thought he was getting a narcotic. And so that was I think what happened was, if he was taking a prescription, then he knew, how much to do and all that. But that's a really expensive habit when you become habituated. And so what ended up happening to him for sure was he bought something from the dark web, thought he could handle it, thought he knew what it was, and it ended up being fentanyl. And that was it.
What I've been hearing from many of my friends, and it's pretty shocking how many people I know who lost children to fentanyl, and I don't like to call it overdose because it's not a matter of overdose. It's not a matter of taking too much of it. It's a matter of taking it to begin with. So, we call it
poisoning,
right? The journey in cases like families like yours is that a child or a person, oftentimes a young person, gets injured and has incredible pain, and they're prescribed an opioid. And oftentimes it goes longer than a week of being on this opioid. And so they become addicted, and the addiction turns into them needing more, and then them going from a prescription to finding it somewhere illegally on the streets. And it sounds like that's pretty much what happened to your son. Even though he knew how dangerous it was, the addiction was so strong that it caused him to lose his life.
I don't know if my son's an exception or not, but he was like one of these overconfident young guys who thinks they can handle it, right? Mm-hmm. They know it's a problem, but they're like, well, it won't happen to me, because I know how to handle this stuff. And, you don't.
Right. And I think for those who are listening, I think they would say also, well, it wouldn't happen to our family because we are present. We're there with our kids. We raise our kids. We talk to our kids. Our kids are educated, right? And to me, there is no more present couple than you and your wife. I mean, you guys are just wholesome patriots. You're present, and again, this drug is so evil that it really sees no boundaries. Jaeson, I want to talk a little bit about some of your work and how this evil drug is making it into America. Just talk a little bit about your background and how you decided to really dedicate your life to helping us Americans live a safer life here.
It's good to be with you. I'm a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, and I was stationed on our border from El Paso to Brownsville as an undercover narcotics agent to a lieutenant in Laredo as the war between Cartel de Golfo and Cartel del Oeste occurred. And then I became a captain at headquarters, building relationships with U.S. intelligence agencies to go after the cartels in Mexico for what they were doing to migrants and Mexican citizens. And I was so pissed off, and I'll be very frank with you here, that their evolution into what they had become, from organized crime into an insurgency, into terrorism, and where we see them today as truly a parallel government, was not getting out to the American people, because all that we're talking about here right now was foreseeable. Fentanyl is just one thing that they're involved in. And so when you hear me say that we are witnessing the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11, I say that because many people look at the border through the lens of immigration. But if you look at what the cartels have become, what they are doing to families, not only in our country, but in Mexico and throughout the world, we're in a completely new paradigm. And the U.S. intelligence agencies and the Homeland Security enterprise should have briefed the American people, or we wouldn't be where we are. And just to give you an example, when I retired in 2016, pissed off and went public, we were at 60,000 overdoses, really poisonings, but that's what we call it because this is how the CDC counts the data. Look at where we are now. From September of 22 to September of 23, we're at 111,000 in 1 year. I want to be very clear so there's no misunderstanding here. The cartels will not stop because they can't. And this is the story of why I'm so frustrated and why I've come out. From their perspective, and despite what everybody is telling you, China this and China that, and yes, that's absolutely true of their involvement when we talk about that. From their perspective, and their perspective matters, they are at war. They do not fear the United States government. They do not fear the Mexican government. What they fear is their rivals. And so when I tell you that they can't stop what they're doing in the production of fentanyl, creating parafentanyl, serafentanyl, and now these zine category narcotics that are being intermittent into fentanyl, this will continue to get worse. And that's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing today. Not only being a journalist for Newsmax, but also testifying before Congress and going anywhere that will have me to talk about their operations and their impact globally, not just in the United States.
Why did you leave?
I realized very clearly that we were at the forefront. I was working with U.S. intelligence agencies to save lives. And in one operation I can talk about publicly because most of them are classified, we rescued 52 people who were about to have their heads chopped off, their arms chopped off, and their legs chopped off. It was a huge success for the state of Texas. And you would think to yourself, well, that's fantastic. Why would that make you angry? It made me angry because the day before I lost 49. Mm-hmm. So try living with that. And that's just the one operation I can tell you about. So for me, it is one thing. It is about obtaining new authorities to go after them, to crush them, not only in Mexico, but globally. And I will tell you this, and I mean this to the very core of who I am. This will not get better until we go after the cartels and their labs. And we'll go into many of the reasons why, but don't let anybody tell you this isn't fixable, because it absolutely is.
Well, good, because by the end of this interview, I don't want everybody to just be down in despair. I'd like to get some good pragmatic advice on what to do. I think for us to wrap our head around fentanyl and what to do about it, it's important that we understand how it works. Doctor, maybe you can explain to me, because fentanyl is not a new thing, right? It's been around for a while. You know, Captain Jaeson, if I may call you Captain for a minute, describes that over 100,000 young Americans are dying from this. And you're not talking only about prescription ones, but you're talking about the ones that are mostly obtained illegally on the market. So just to wrap our head around, why is fentanyl so attractive to people, and how does it work?
Well, so I can talk about the opioids more generally, and I could let Jaeson talk about fentanyl specifically. But generally speaking, there's parts of our brain that use the opioids, and there's ones that our brains make for us that helps damp down pain and increase pleasure. And so we have a built-in system to help us regulate pain and pleasure. And it just so happens that there are things naturally occurring and now unnaturally occurring in the environment that get on those receptors and turn them on. And the body ends up responding to the point where it needs it to actually function. You feel good when you take it, and when you stop taking it, you feel bad. And so it's a push-pull. And so we all have the kind of ability to respond to those. But in terms of why fentanyl, I suspect that it's inexpensive, easily transportable. We've used it in medicine for decades, but it's usually used in the hospital for very brief periods of time because it's great at temporarily shutting down pain.
Are doctors prescribing fentanyl for people to take home?
Not that, I don't think so. So
Not so
usually
much.
they would use some of the other narcotics to take home, and we're being told more and more and taking, educational modules about, here's what you can prescribe, here's how long, don't do more than this, and then you have to report anytime you prescribe a narcotic. So things have gotten better since the 90s when my son got exposed, when, essentially they were writing prescriptions like candy.
Right. Right. There's definitely been a reckoning against the pharmaceuticals that have been pushing basically zero tolerance for any sort of pain. And so things were prescribed. So things changed a little bit over there, yet people are consuming fentanyl in insane amounts. And so it's mostly an illegal consumption. Was that right, Jaeson?
It is, yeah. But there's also a whole new realm that we've gone into. And if you look at so many young people that are dying from this, give you a great example. I was with the Lost Voices of Fentanyl family outreach group ran by April Babcock and Virginia Krieger, incredible folks. And I was at the rally, and there was a mom there who had lost her 3-year-old son to fentanyl. So that 3-year-old son didn't order fentanyl. That 3-year-old son was crawling on the carpet. And what do babies do? They put their hands in their mouths, and there was residual fentanyl on the ground, and it killed him. I can tell you a story of another mom whose daughter goes over to her boyfriend's house, and he was using fentanyl. And so what he would do at work, so that nobody knew what he was doing, he would put his fentanyl in his water, and they would take it all day, and he would just slowly sip it at work, so nobody knew what was happening. Well, he put it in the refrigerator. He went to get food. She had been working out, goes into the refrigerator, grabs the water, drinks it, dead right there. We are in a whole new realm of poisonings that Americans are not being briefed on. And this is very important to understand. We didn't have a fentanyl problem in this country. This is what I call the great lie. The cartels moved this problem because they see gaps in their market very well, very well. They saw a gap in the market when there were addiction for oxycodone, for hydrocodone. They saw the gap in the market for heroin. I'll give you a great example of what I'm talking about. In Kensington, where we have one of the biggest open air fentanyl markets in the country. How did that evolve? Well, if you look back to the 70s, we had the Colombians moving in heroin into there, owned the market forever. In 2010, I was there last year, and I was with DEA and law enforcement trying to really understand how Kensington had become what it had. The Mexican cartel, specifically Chapo Guzman's cell, moved in there and began taking over the heroin market by giving it away for free. So they took over the heroin market. Then in 2015, when fentanyl came online, because if you look at the data, we never had fentanyl crossing our southern border until 2015. And for the entire year, according to CBP data, it was 70 pounds. That is how they get it into the communities. Then from there, they give it away for free. So you see, you don't have the addicts, but you have the addicts for heroin. So when they come to get their heroin, they give you this for free. And they spread that virus. See, this is the story that's not told. What do you always hear from these pundits on television? If we didn't have such a demand, there wouldn't be such a supply. They never tell the American people how the cartels drive that. Saw the same thing with methamphetamine right now throughout the country. I was with the meth squad in 2005 in Houston, Texas. And all our job was to take down labs like that overnight. Remember, this is where pseudoephedrine labs were domestically being run. People would go in to do the doctor shopping. You may remember they'd go in and they would buy all this pseudoephedrine. Chapo Guzman again saw that gap in the market, began working with China, importing P2P, phenylacetone, created the mega labs for methamphetamine, and then pushed it for free. And I will never forget it. We covered 18 counties with a special unit known as the high intensity drug trafficking areas. It was like somebody turned the lights off because as they came into Houston, Texas, they gave away methamphetamine for free and they took over the market. Right now, across this country, Americans should be told that whether, look, we're talking about U.S.-based street gangs or what we call tier 1 gangs that impact multiple regions of our country, they are all collaborating with the cartels. And this is the story that should be told to the American people, how they move and create markets. They've done all of this. And it's also how they've changed the analogs to create more deadly strains from regular fentanyl to parafentanyl to serafentanyl, and now mixing in these xylazine category drugs that I'm talking to you about. But you hear nothing. You hear nothing from DEA leadership. You hear nothing from the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And this is why I've gone public to say, if you think they will stop, I want to be very clear, they will not. From their perspective, they're battling a rival. So when we talk about how this has become an epidemic level, you've got the data right here. Those of us that lived through the 80s with the crack epidemic, we were at 10,000 overdoses, that's what we called them back then, per year. In the worst part of the crack epidemic, look at where we are today, 111,000 in 1 year. Unprecedented.
The question that comes to my mind is the cartels, they don't have a nefarious agenda other than making money, I'm assuming, right? And so why would they put fentanyl, knowing that the tiniest amount, I mean, the doctor explained to me earlier when we were walking in here, that the tiniest amount, just the wrong dosage, by the tiniest amount can kill someone, right? And so presumably they know this. Why would they put something that would kill their own clients? Then they have to just create another market. And when you're talking about xylazine, or how they call it trank now, I mean, that stuff is just, I mean, that's nasty when you see what it does to a person's body. Again, obviously kills off their own clients. Why would the cartels do that? It just, is there no bigger nefarious agenda to just kill Americans?
I get asked this question all over the country, everywhere I go. And, this is why we have the DEA. This is why we have a DHS secretary. This is why we have the Office of National Drug Control Policy. From the cartel's perspective, and this is very important to understand, they don't give a damn. They don't care if they kill every American in the United States. Because from what you've been told is if we, the Americans, didn't have such a drug problem, they wouldn't exist, right? We've been told that for how many decades? You've not been told that Sinaloa is in 54 countries. Cartel Jalisco New Generation, the most hyper-violent cartel in Mexico, is in 48. They have killed hundreds of thousands of Mexican citizens. They are killing more Americans than any terrorist organization in the world. They don't give a damn. From their perspective, and that's where I go back to this, they're at war. And they will tell you that. And if their rival gets a better narcotic, why they have gone to these change the analogs within fentanyl is because they are fearful that their rival will create a better product, make more money, be able to buy more surface-to-air missiles, more armored vehicles, 50 caliber belt-fed machine guns, light anti-tank weapons, RPGs, and the long list of military-grade weaponry goes on, that they will lose their plazas and their areas of control. That's from their perspective. And despite what everyone is telling you, their perspective matters. This is why I am trying to create such a sense of urgency. They don't care if they kill all of us. CJ&G came to rise because of their movement of narcotics into Australia and into Europe. They're one of the youngest cartels in Mexico, yet their rise mostly came from moving narcotics overseas. But what do you hear from these so-called pundits on national television? Oh, if you just didn't have a drug problem in the United States. It's bullshit. It's been wrong for decades. And American families, like Doc here, are paying for it.
Well, I just want to better understand. So in their mind, they're in competition against other cartels.
Exactly.
And so they need a more potent drug because their base is possibly not feeling as strong of a hit from, let's say, the original fentanyl, so they need to put more fentanyl in, or they need to
change the analogs to create a stronger one. Exactly. Right. So what's happening is, and when we talk about pills, they move powder into the East Coast mostly. They move a lot of pills into the West Coast. Sinaloa is the number one mover for deadly fentanyl into the country. Most of the fentanyl we're seizing in Texas right now is what's called parafentanyl. Doesn't mean it's so much stronger. It just means they've changed the analogs and how they make it, leveraging chemists right out of universities that they've hired. So if you look at the pill presses that they're using, they're pushing this stuff out by the tens of thousands of pills.
So you're just saying they're just going to try to make it more potent, and then the Americans are the guinea pigs.
That's exactly
That's
right.
what you're saying. So they don't really care. They just
and the Mexican
compete.
And their own citizens and others around the world. But the problem is that where have we been focused for the last 20 years? Middle East terrorism. So when you hear me say this is the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11, they are the synergy. They are the synergy behind not just drugs, but also so many other things. If you want to move a terrorist into the United States from the Middle East, who you got to work through? They're them and their alien smuggling organizations. Right. But what are we all told? They're just those drug traffickers. The same story you've been told since the 1980s. And so this is how we have gotten where we are today. And this is exactly why I'm trying to get it out, because I can tell you, with everything I am, this is the beginning. This is not the end.
Oh, who do we point the finger at? I mean, I'm sure, obviously, we have to have self-reliance and first think about ourselves. But is China behind this? Because China is claiming that they're just selling the raw material, and the raw material could turn into anything. So China is saying, well, this is not our fault. We're not trying to kill Americans through fentanyl. We're selling raw products. Mexicans are basically saying, of course, we're not trying to kill Americans. We're working with Americans, even though their current president is nationalist. So part of what he has to say is that he's not a fan of Americans, but they're basically saying, well, no, that fentanyl is so small and so difficult to track. You can't blame us for not finding it. And so therefore, supposedly the Mexicans are doing everything they can to stop it from making it into the United States. When you talk about intelligence failure, is it that we don't know where it originates from, or is that we are not doing enough to prevent it? Yeah. What do you mean by intelligence failure?
Yeah, they know what is happening. They know how, when I say they, the U.S. intelligence agencies, they know what's going on. I can assure you that because I made sure they did for many, many years. And what I found is it's not a conspiracy. It really isn't. We have a major leadership problem. Look, I have briefed everyone from senators to congressmen on both sides, state reps across the country, and this will stun many of your viewers. If you're on the left, you learn what is happening from MSNBC and CNN. If you're on the right, learn about it from Fox News and other far-right news organizations. When I sit down with them now, and I brief them privately, and I do this all the time, the very first question I ask them now is this: when was the last time you were briefed, either classified or unclassified, by the U.S. intelligence agencies on what is happening? You know what the answer has been for me? You're going to be stunned. One told me, Jason, I was briefed by a former guy with CBP who hasn't been on the border in 10 years. So unless you're in certain select committees, you are not getting the classified briefings. Going to the border, taking a tour in a helicopter and riding on a boat is not a briefing on what the evolution of these cartels and how they have what they have become in Mexico as a parallel government. And it is why we are where we are. And in fairness to the Mexican people, it is why they have lost hundreds of thousands of people. Now, when you talk about China and China's involvement in this, I want to be very clear here. China is the global leader in the production of fentanyl. They are the global leader of money laundering to terrorist organizations and the cartels. And they are the global leader in the pushing of chemical precursors, not only into Mexico, but around the world, and in the manufacturing and production, period. Now, let me move that to a side for a second, because if you listen to the U.S. intelligence agencies, all they're going to tell you is China, 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 China. From the cartel's perspective, they've already evolved around them. They're working with India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh to import chemical precursors because they know we could at some point stop that. They've been preparing for this for years. They're also ready for many other exceptions if we get the terrorism designation, rebranding, renaming, to try to avoid these things. These are not people with tattoos on their forehead. These people are no joke. They go through basic, intermediate, advanced training. They are run by attorneys, lawyers, and accountants, and they're operating globally. And I will say it again and again, if we don't get the authorities we need, which is exactly why I'm trying to get the terrorism designation to go after them, because I want to be very clear to your audience, very clear. They won't stop because they can't. And for us here in the United States, and for families like the docs and many, many others, this is going to get worse before it gets better.
So I want to get into what we can do from the perspective of self-reliance and what we can do internally here, nationally, domestically. But I have one more question internationally, what needs to be done. And so your vision is that we designate the cartels as a terrorist group for essentially harboring terror and bringing fentanyl and all of that. But if the United States of America designates the cartels as a terrorist group, then now Mexico is essentially harboring terrorists. Is that really the issue here with the international relations? dilemma? Is that why the United States is not doing this? What is the reason why our government is not designating them as
It's really not a conspiracy. I'll tell you, I've been at it since 2016, and I used to think that, it was all these things. I will just tell you, we're broken. We're broken as a country. There's a lot of concerns of commerce from the Mexican government's perspective. I'll tell you right now, and everyone knows this within the agencies from U.S. intelligence agencies to federal law enforcement to those of us who have been working this for 20 plus years, corruption is at the highest levels. When you sit down with the cartels and you say, what's the difference between the government of Mexico and the cartels, they'll laugh at you and they'll say, there is no difference. We're all one and the same.
What is the difference between the government of the United States and the cartels?
So there's still a big difference. Thank goodness.
Thank
still
God.
A big difference. But if we wait, and I say this all the time, all you have to do is look to Mexico to see what is coming here. You see it in the violence. You see it in the poisonings. It's across the board. But I will tell you this to answer your question. I know the law enforcement side of this very well. We have to have new authorities to go after them, because trying to do what we have done for 50 plus years is never going to work. Our law enforcement model, leveraging Fourth Amendment, was never designed to take on the world's problems. And we've tried to push that out into the Middle East terrorism area, and it didn't work. So why am I trying to get the authorities for the foreign terrorism designation? Because it puts speed in the system. 3 major things you get from that. First, you cannot be a terrorist in our country. It allows me and allows law enforcement to rapidly remove them. Now I don't have to work a 2-year case on them and to try to get them on drugs or some other thing. Do you see what I mean? I can get them out of the country very rapidly, quickly. There are tens of thousands of them here. Now, second, they're operating globally. This allows us to put them on no-fly lists. They can't move across the ocean, and we're limiting their mobility globally. And then third and final, you will hear from these experts that we've got to go after their money. We've got to go after their assets. Okay, I've got some insight for everyone. No shit. We've been doing that under the law enforcement model for over 20 years. The problem is the American public hasn't been told how slow our system moves. And we want that, all of us. We want that as Americans. But when we're taking on global problems outside the United States, I want to be very clear on that, outside the U.S., this will allow us to go after that money, to go after their assets real time versus making a 2-year case on them and then watching as they move those hundreds of millions of dollars from banks all over the world very rapidly, very quickly, and we can't keep up. This is how we win. It's not about war. It is about authorities that allow us to attack the networks, the lawyers, the accountants, the people you never hear us going after. Because as we have gone after the bosses for years, what do? They just replace them. So we've got to leverage network theory. And I don't go into this too much publicly, but every cartel is different. And how you go after the Sinaloa cartel versus how you go after CG&G versus how you go after those along the Frontera is totally different based on the structure and how they operate, and then attacking those key nodes. That's how those of us who have done it, who have gone after the Los Zetas and absolutely disrupted them, went after Cartel de Golfo as they went to war. We know exactly what needs to be done.
So basically, you're saying if you designate them as terrorists, you can take your gloves off and actually get the work done.
There it is.
Okay. So I want to ask some questions about some of this, the domestic issue of fentanyl, because so much of it is already here, enough to kill cities of people. For me, I want to understand, if I can get my loved ones to avoid getting on fentanyl or opioids to begin with, or to not get into weed, right? I know you warn families all the time that it is in fact weed or marijuana is in fact oftentimes a gateway drug into narcotics, I guess. And this is a very unpopular opinion for my generation, right? It's like I'm almost not allowed to say this, but I've come to believe that it is true. I've seen enough evidence of that. Is that enough? Or is fentanyl going to be used for chemical weapons where you describe that it could be on a surface and somebody could die from there? Is that something we need to worry about? I don't mean to just freak out the audience. If we at least have a very solid public service announcement that says, just keep your loved ones away from drugs. Yeah. Is that at least the step that needs to be taken here?
I believe that's a huge part of it, a huge part of it. Americans are not being told the discussions we're having right now. And, for those of us who remember back in the 70s and 80s, how did we grow up? Just say no campaigns, right? This is your brain and show the frying pan, and then this is your brain on drugs, and then, you crack the egg. And we all grew up with that, learning what these drugs would do. Well, now look at what our motto is. One pill can kill, right? And you say, okay, well, that's at least something. But it doesn't make any sense when you look at the strategy we have. We need a national campaign that is unprecedented to go after this. It needs to be in every school. It needs to be on every show at night. And we need a major initiative by this government to absolutely inform the American people of what is really happening in the evolution. Because look, we're looking at things we've never seen before. It's not just the poisonings. We're looking at second layer addiction issues that this country's never seen. When you take fentanyl and then you're mixing xylazine in that, we don't even have enough data to understand what is the 10-year and 20-year impact of anyone that survives this. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So we need such a change in the harm reduction model that has been in place by both Republicans and Democrats for a very long time under the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and truly go after the enforcement side globally after these cartels, and then domestically doing these things to inform the American people.
It's awkward to say this in the middle of an episode about fentanyl, which is a horrible thing, but I'm actually relieved because this is something we can do something about, right? If we inform Americans of how dangerous it is, if we are allowed to actually shame the communities for allowing drugs within our communities, which is something that America has taken away, right? It's like you're not allowed to shame anybody for any sort of bad behavior anymore because you're shaming them. Doctor, I'm curious on the CDC side, the AMA side, the medical establishment. They have been so strong when it came to communicating about COVID. So it's not that doctors cannot communicate what they perceive as dangerous to their patients and to the entire country. Has the CDC come out with the type of warnings that Jaeson is talking about, at least parallel to what they've done with COVID, right? They've managed to tell every child all over America to wear a mask. Have they done something somewhat similar when it comes to fentanyl? Are you seeing that on the medical side?
Certainly not in our community. There's not the kind of widespread educational efforts. I mean, not just for the kids, but for parents, for spouses, for brothers and sisters. It's like, what do you need to do to reduce the chances that somebody you love is going to, whether it's alcohol or fentanyl or anything, is don't get them exposed early. Look out for the early warning signs, grades going down, changes in behavior, hanging out with the wrong kids. Those are things that happened to our son. We just didn't realize these are early warning signs that things are going wrong. And then if we can take some personal responsibility, and I think that's going to supplement, big policy things, but take responsibility, protect your loved ones. And if you suspect something, challenge them, and it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to get pushback. They're going to be angry. It's going to be uncomfortable. But if you suspect something is going wrong with your child or your loved one, get them out of that situation. That's the best thing you can do. Is if they're hanging around with the wrong kids, get them out of that situation. Move if you have to. I mean, there's a lot of reading now going back to say, geez, all this stuff happened to our kid. It's happening to kids all over the country, and parents don't know. This is a warning sign. You can do something, but you better do it early, because once they get too far down that path, it's a lot tougher. Better to recognize the early warning signs from a parent's perspective and then intervene.
One of the first things you mentioned to me was to not allow my kids to ever get on marijuana. And I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on that, because it is counterculture to say that. And so what led you to say that to me? So
there's three things. One is that the current marijuana is way stronger and way more addictive than the stuff that was around in the 60s and 70s. The second thing is kids are starting out way younger. which is when your brain is most susceptible to rewiring by addictive chemicals, and it is addictive. And then the third thing is it's being laced with all kinds of addictive drugs. So you're finding fentanyl in marijuana, you're finding meth in marijuana, and so it's not an accident. Marijuana is now legal in a lot of places, and so kids think it's okay, and they're not just getting marijuana; they may be getting meth and fentanyl.
But what if you buy it from like a reputable source?
There is no reputable source for marijuana. There's no quality control for marijuana. You can get marijuana in my state, Minnesota. There's no guarantee that that's not, nobody tests it to make sure what's in it. The problem I have with it is it's false that it's not addictive. It is addictive.
True.
It's way more addictive now. They're getting it to younger and younger kids, and they're lacing it with stuff that makes it worse. So, I would encourage any parent or sibling to say, whatever you do not start down this path.
Okay, so as you described, many of the folks that get addicted to these opioids have a severe injury, and they're in excruciating pain. And so they get prescribed something. At what point do you say, no more? 10 days? 20 days, 1 month? Is there something where you could tell a family, this is where you draw the line and it's going to become an addiction?
Well, physicians are now being taught this, where they weren't, 20, 30 years ago. It was like, just keep, now it's like, you cannot prescribe more than this amount, But some people get addicted sooner than others. And, then some of the other early warning signs is your medications are disappearing. So if you've been prescribed a pain medication and it's disappearing, it could be that somebody in your family or a kid that's visiting has a problem, and now they're taking it. Uh-huh. So that's another warning sign. If you're saying, where did my Tylenol 3 go? Or where did my, or why is my wine cabinet empty? There's a lot of things where, we just, these are now known that if things are disappearing, you need to suspect.
Sure. So I have Narcan here. I actually picked it up at a local drugstore. It didn't require a prescription. It was actually quite easy to get. I think they even sell it online on Amazon. Do you recommend having college students carry Narcan in their backpacks? Is fentanyl that prevalent on college campuses that one should have one of these?
I would definitely say so. Listen, at the end of the day, we're seeing things we've never seen before. My suggestion is absolutely, college universities right now where kids are experimenting and leaving the home for the first time, we're in a whole new paradigm here. I interviewed a mom in Arizona who had lost her 13-year-old daughter. The daughter had some girls come over to spend the night. They ordered Adderall from an app. The guy shows up at the door to sell it to him. It wasn't Adderall. It was pills from the cartel that were cloned pills. And the girls left that morning. She noticed her daughter didn't wake up, goes upstairs and her daughter's dead. Her daughter was not an addict. This is what has to come across to everyone here. This is poisonings. So if this is going to help, it may not help you. It may be there for the next person. You see what I'm saying? This needs to be in every classroom in universities all over the country. Let me tell you how bad this has become so everyone's aware. I fly with law enforcement. One of the things I do, being in media now, is I try to bring what law enforcement's up against with these cartels closer. And I was flying with some pilots with the Texas Department of Public Safety's aircraft division the other day. They all have them. Do you know why? It's not for who's in the back. It's because when they make these big drug seizures in the middle of nowhere, the air from those blades can bring it up in the helicopter and they can get micro doses. So just in case they have this, this is where we are. This is what Americans need to understand when we talk about a 3-year-old crawling on carpet and literally putting his little hands in his mouth and it kills him. We're in a whole new category. And this is why I'm so frustrated that this is the job of ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy. This is the job of the Homeland Security Enterprise and DEA executive leadership. But the American people aren't told.
So Captain Jaeson, you mentioned the examples of 13-year-olds who are thinking that they're taking something, but they end up taking fentanyl or tranq. And I can't help but think about all these young people who are on these mental health medications, whether it's benzos or antidepressants or medication that helps you focus. I know of an example of somebody in Los Angeles who ran out of her antidepressant medication. And so she went online and she ordered a pill and she died from fentanyl, not realizing that she's going to be taking a drug that's going to kill her. And I'm wondering, from what you're hearing, are kids who are prescribed mental health medications, are they reaching out? Is that what you guys are seeing also in some of the emergency rooms, an increase in the number of deaths from fentanyl where people didn't realize what they're actually taking?
Oh, I'm sure that's a lot of that. People got a pill from somebody that they didn't know, or they did know, but it didn't come from the pharmacist, and it's a counterfeit pill that has poison in it. But you did mention there are a couple of medications that we use for psychiatric indications that actually are addictive in themselves, and those would be the medications people take for attention deficit disorder or sleep disorders, and then the things people take to reduce anxiety. So even though we consider them psychiatric medications and they can be prescribed, they can be addictive. Now, the antidepressants, not so much, but I mean, whatever you do, don't take a pill that didn't come from a pharmacist directly. But beware, those other medications can be addictive and can lead you down that pathway that you don't want to go.
Well, so many kids are self-diagnosing themselves right now, or they say they have anxiety, and so therefore they'll go to a therapist, and they start with medication so young, and oftentimes, I'm sure some kids need it, but I'd imagine that so many of them don't need it, and so here is yet another roadmap into why they would be looking for medication that ultimately ends up being something that they didn't realize they were taking. Jaeson, are you guys seeing counterfeit pills to things like anti-anxiety or benzos?
Everything. That's the story here. Most of the interviews I do with moms and dads across the country, their children are dead, not because they thought they never ordered fentanyl. They ordered something else that was delivered, and that's what killed them. They never thought they were taking fentanyl. I think this is the story, too, that's very important that we discuss, because the clone pills coming from the cartels are incredible. You can put, and I've seen this, the little blue pills side by side. One is a clone fentanyl pill from the cartel labs. Another is an industrial grade pharmaceutical pill. You cannot visually tell a difference. Sometimes a little lighter in the coloring, in the color dye that they use, but you would have to be an expert on that to understand that. So this is the real story. And what is happening too in these industrial grade presses that they're using down there, when they're stamping them, they're pushing out so many at a time, they're not cleaning the stamps. And this is how you get a hot pill. And they're just pushing this poison out.
What's a hot pill?
A hot pill is a loaded pill. When they're pushing this poison, right, and they're building it, and they're making it into these little blue pills that you see coming across the border, they're pushing these out by the tens of thousands in mass production. Well, they're not cleaning the pill presses. So what happens is you get a load up of a little bit of fentanyl. Now you stamp it again. Now you got a hot pill. DEA says that right now, 60%, now think of this, 60% of the fentanyl pills crossing from Mexico into the United States are hot pills. Think of that. So you're truly gambling with your life when you're taking these pills from these cartels.
Why do you think we're not hearing more about this?
Leadership.
Are they just focused elsewhere, or?
They are. Look, right now, if you look at where ONDCP is, it is a harm reduction model. And that harm reduction model in your own data right here shows the level of failure. So to me, I don't care left, right, up or down. It doesn't matter. If it's not working, you don't do it. And I'm a big data guy. That data drives everything I do. And when you look at this arc and you see the number of poisonings in this country, we've never been here. Not even close. The other part of this is you can look at the data from CBP. Very important for your public, for the audience to understand. What that data represents from CBP is the wave of narcotics against the nation, okay? Then you have another layer that you have to look at, and that's domestic seizures by law enforcement amongst the 18,000. Right now at the second highest it's ever been. Then you have a third category, the overdose deaths, which you have right here. When you have all of this the way you do, what that tells you is that production in the synthetic labs or in the labs making this synthetic product is too much for our system. Our strategy doesn't work. And so we can't arrest our way out of this and we can't seize our way out of this. And it's exactly why I'm trying to get the authorities that we need to go after the labs. Because in the old days, you were stuck with a growth cycle, right? You had to grow cocaine or coca, you had to grow poppy, you had to grow all of these things in order. And so you had a cycle to that. The labs of today, people need to understand, it is only limited by the amounts of chemical precursors that they are getting. So these labs are running 24/7, 365. They never shut down. And that's why we're losing so badly at all levels.
So what I'm basically hearing from you, there's stuff that needs to be done on a national level, right? The government needs to designate the cartels as terrorists, but there's stuff that could be done by us, by communities, by warning our friends and our family members of how dangerous it is to take any drugs whatsoever, by holding our doctors accountable to not overprescribe, by being more careful with our medication and our medicine cabinets, possibly lock those medicines up, right? Is there anything else that I'm missing? What else can we do to be more self-reliant, to take care of ourselves and our families and our loved ones so that we don't fall into this evil drug addiction?
I would say that and I truly mean this, we're in a place we've never been before. You know, when we talk about at our age, when we grew up, kids experiment. That's what they do, but they shouldn't be dead over it. You have to communicate to your children and the people you love the most in your life. I don't care what their age anymore. You can't take a pill from somebody that gives you something because they could have gotten it from someone that they are not aware of. If it's not coming from a doctor, do not take that.
There is no such thing as a trustable source.
That's exactly
drugs.
Right.
That's
not today.
What you just said, right?
Absolutely.
There is no such a thing. I want to talk about non-despair, and I want to talk about the service, because both of you have been through hell on earth with what you've seen, the stories that you've collected, what you personally experienced with your children. How do you function? How do you move on? How do you live on? Is it through your service to people around you that you're able to pick up and be strong? You know, how do you recover from what you've experienced?
You know, my hope is that if, you know, it's tough to share stories of your life where you feel like I've failed. But, you know, my hope would be that if somebody, just one person says, oh, I recognize that. That's my son. I need to do something right now. And you know, if I can just save one person from going down the road that my son went down, then that's a good day for me.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like the captain has a bigger job, but a bigger win in the end if he's successful. But for me, it's like, you can get through almost anything if you can find a way to use that experience to make things better.
Yeah, there's healing through service. I'm sure it's never complete healing, and I'm sure you and your wife always feel like there's a hole in your heart. But everything that you do to serve the public now and to warn people is, you know, a big part of your legacy. I really appreciate that, Captain.
I have been the guy that goes to your house, knocks on your door, and tells you the person you love the most in the world is never coming home. I've done it so many times. Sometimes I remember these families collapsing in front of me, and I think about it. How did I even forget that for a little while, right? And there is a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. I want everyone to know that I know our enemy very well. I know it better than most in the U.S. intelligence agencies because I've been focused on it for so long. And success to us moving forward is getting this terrorism designation. It's getting these authorities. And I want families out there to know when they begin to see change, that we're on the right path. First, it is changing our domestic policies to really illuminate to the American people what's happening. Second, it is when we get the authorities to go after them. But there's a third part to this, and that is that we are going to get it done. It's not a perception. We will get it done. To what degree of damage will happen to so many families, I don't know. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but I will tell you this, we will get it done, and we will get the leadership we need. into these cartels and for what they have done to so many families in this country, so many families in Mexico and around the world. God help them. And I mean that, because we are going to create a unified command of the finest warriors around the world who operate clandestinely. And there will be nowhere on planet Earth they can hide for what they've done to so many of these families. And I mean it to the core of who I am.
Friends, let this be our mission, to stare at this evil and not look away, and be so convicted in knowing that we have to fight this, that we become stronger and more powerful than our enemies would ever believe. And I think that while the subject is so difficult to deal with, and while it could send people into the pit of despair because it's so scary, it will do the exact opposite for those of us around this table and those who are listening. It will only convict us, and it will only arm us so that we do what's right and we'll do what's good for our kids and for our country. So God bless you both. Thank you so much for coming in here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for the very helpful education. Appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.